Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Stu, how are you?
I'm not bad, thank you, Lorraine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So you had a really good idea.
Well, I don't have many, do I? So
No, to be fair, but I think this one is a good one, Stu, because you
Okay.
said there's lots going on at the moment where people are saying, well, lots of delays in conveyancing. What do conveyancers really do? And
Yep.
of course, you and I spend quite a lot of time talking in general terms about what conveyancers do, whether it's dealing with the 19 different sort of parties that might be involved, whether it's dealing with, my pet hates fencer certificates and conservatory furniture, all the things which, whilst important to our clients, don't actually go to the heart of the matter, which is the title. And of course, the title of the property is where property lawyers started, and clearly is where we actually spend a lot of our time and a lot of our work and a lot of the risks too. And as you sort of said on the phone the other day, it's not something that's really talked about. So we thought we'd talk about what conveyancers really do. So off you go, Stu. You start, lovely.
Well, I think it's there's this sort of misdemeanor out there, isn't there? That all we do, we just sit there, we tick a few boxes, do a bit of this, bit of that, have a few cups of tea, cups of coffee. Oh yeah, cool. So all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're conveyancers. We'll just take our time a bit here, shall we?
Yeah. I think we should actually.
Right.
You actually
Okay.
had a slip of the tongue there, mate. You said misdemeanors.
Oh yeah, good point there. What does misdemeanors mean?
Yeah.
I
hope you've not been involved in any.
So yeah, literally, there's this innuendo, isn't there, that we just sit there, take our time with everything, tick a few boxes here and there.
You do a bit of online AML, online compliance, and of course, well, we wouldn't need to speed anything up, or there's no incentive for conveyancers to speed things up because, well, when do we get paid? Let's just think. Is it at the end, Stu?
Yeah, somewhere near the end.
Yeah.
Somewhere near the end. So isn't it weird that?
Sorry, do we get paid anywhere near as much as the agents?
No.
No? Oh.
No.
Really?
But look, let's cut to the chase. We get paid at the end of the transaction. We are qualified a lot of the time, professionals a lot of the time. Okay. Do the world really think that we sit there and we want these matters to take, an infinite amount of time before they go through? Of course not. We want to complete as quickly as possible because at the end of the day, whatever way you want to put it, law firms are still businesses. They still need to earn money. So we want to get things exchanged and completed as quickly as possible to earn money.
Well, and something also is that very few of the other professionals involved in the chain actually have acting in their client's best interests as part of the professional responsibility. If you or I have found that we haven't acted in our client's best interests, well, worst case scenario, we could be subject to disciplinary proceedings if it was that bad. So,
of course, so we provide a service, we act on our client's best interest, we get paid on completion. Okay, so it's not just the tick box exercise. And I think to those that maybe are not within our industry, i.e. our legal industry, rather than the moving process, for example, what maybe outsiders have seen are the boxes where there are ticks. And there is a tiny, minuscule part of what we do that involves protocol forms where there are tick boxes. But that doesn't define what we as property lawyers do. We don't just tick a few boxes here and there. So today, what we wanted to talk about, I think you agreed, is, the important part of what we do. And that's not necessarily just the tick box element on those protocol forms that people have seen. And, people know about stamp duty, they know about AML, so we've discussed that previously. So there's that awareness. But I'm not so sure, unless you're a lawyer, what people know about conveyancing, what is actually the nooks and crannies of what we do, which of course all emigrates from one document on the basis it's registered. But it's all about the title to the property, isn't it? That's where, the real important stuff, the nitty gritty, shall we say.
Yeah, and of course, as I said in the intro, Stu, that's actually where our job started.
Yeah.
Our job is to check the title. That's why we give the lender a certificate of title. I mean, the certificate of title isn't a request for the funds. That's not its primary aim. The certificate of title actually, for anybody that's not read it, is based on really a very long document indeed, in which case there's loads of undertakings, loads of promises from, very one-way promises from the conveyancer to the lender, which essentially says, we are submitting this to you, and on this basis you can send us the money because we are warranting to you that the title is good and marketable, and that ergo, you as the lender are going to be able to sell the property if you have to repossess it. And of course, fundamentally for our buyer clients, that our buyers are going to be able to sell it when they want to come and sell it.
So what it's not, yeah. So what exactly? So what it's not is a simple exercise. Oh, we might want to complete next Wednesday. Just submit the cot.
Yeah.
You don't just submit a cot. It's not a form that, it's like you say. Its prime aim is not ordering money. That is only part of it. Once we submit that document, as you say, we are giving that warranty. So if that transaction isn't ready and there are still matters that are outstanding, you can't give that certificate.
Well, I must admit, I've been subject to, sort of professional criticism before now. My name's been sort of, frankly, slagged off up and down a chain because Lorraine wouldn't, we're all, as you say, we're all aiming for it next week, and Lorraine wouldn't get ready and submit her certificate of title. And I said exactly that point, Stu, because I'm not ready. Yeah. It's not because I want to be difficult, and it's not because I haven't got enough time to give the lender the notice. It's because the title investigations aren't complete. You've not sent me all the replies. It's not a question of just getting ready. I'll send the cot. Just I can always send the money back, because as you say, we have to be at the point at which we submit the certificate of title. Everything has to be satisfactory and everything has to be resolved. And I'm not sure how many people. I'm not sure how many people actually realise that, to be quite honest.
Definitely.
I have to say. So Stu, well, let's have a little think then. So, I mean, let's not even talk about, a complex, smelly old unregistered title, which lots of people just automatically think isn't valid, even though it is. So, I mean, let's just pick out some of the sort of highlights of the things that we can find on a title. Okay. So, the importance of the property register. Let's start there. So, okay, what's the property register going to tell us? Well, it's going to tell us whether the property is freehold or leasehold. It's going to tell us details of the lease and the first parties to the lease. So we can always glance there to see, the residue of the lease, whether the lease has been extended. And if the property enjoys any rights, they're going to be contained in the property register. So, if a property needs access over a driveway, a piece of land, another area, an access way, well, if it's not referred to in the property register, the property doesn't probably have the right, the appropriate right of access. So that would be a bit of a disaster, and we would then have to ask for a statutory declaration or a statement of truth and indemnity insurance.
And I think the key thing to point out here as well is that if that matter you could not conclude, for example, by way of indemnity insurance, stat decks, things like that, then that property is not sufficient, or that issue would prevent you giving that certificate to your lender. These are the important things that we do. This is the legal due diligence. So an aspect or an issue like that, shall we say, is really, really important that we make sure that these things are covered off, because if they're not, we would be subject to a negligence claim.
Yeah, well, the way I characterise it to people, Stu, when I'm teaching, I usually say this as a starting point, really. You can have a stunning piece of land or a stunning property, and I know I've said this before, I'm sure, but what gives a piece of land or a property its value is the rights that it enjoys. You can have a stunning piece of land or a stunning property, but if you can't get to it and it's got no services, it's not really worth very much, however stunning and however beautiful it might be. And the problem, I think, with the house buying process, and I completely understand this from the point of view of the buying public, of course I do, but is, you know, mentally and emotionally, they've seen somewhere they want to live. Mentally, they are already moving in. They're deciding where their furniture is going to go. And of course, in a different context, Stu, we've said this before, we're often telling people the things they don't want to hear. But of course, the irony is that actually they're the things we're being paid to tell them.
Exactly.
That's our
right.
job. And I always used to think, actually, something else that it took me a long, long time, many years of practice and stress to realise, Stu, is that as the lawyer, I can't put everything right. I would think that I could give somebody a nice sort of gift wrapped property with no risk and no problems. And I don't think such a property exists, you know, and I think everybody has to accept in any property transaction, there's an element of risk. But I used to think I could put everything right. And of course we can't. So mention the proprietorship registers too. What sort of issues are we going to have lurking on there?
Yeah, so when we move into the proprietorship register, you know, and when you think about the most simplistic part of everything, you know, we are checking that the person we're going to contract with or our clients are going to contract with is actually the registered owner of the property. So, you know, we're going to look into this part of it to make sure that, you know, all the contracts have been drawn up correctly. You know, contracts aren't just a pre-printed piece of paper. You know, they have reference to the title that the seller owns, and the two have to link. If they don't link, the land registry will not register your ownership. Okay, so think about this. We're just about to shell out, I don't know what, 250, 300 grand on a property. And if we get this part wrong, you cannot register that in your name. You can't then sell it.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And I have to say, I'm sometimes very depressed at the very poor quality of contracts that I see, because again, it's not a box ticking exercise, it's not a form filling exercise, and again, people seem to forget, and it's perhaps because they don't know, which is perfectly possible, I must add, that the contract for the sale of land is a contract for the sale and purchase of a completely unique and finite resource, and by definition, and I say this a lot, you know, the land that the building that you're sitting in is sitting on, there's nowhere else, there's no other piece of land that fits that description on the planet. And I think people forget that that's what we're dealing with. It's, you know, if you and I enter into a contract, Stu, and for me to supply you with 1 million widgets, and I breach that contract, well, you can probably get 1 million widgets somewhere else. Or if I offer you services, you'll be able to get them somewhere else. In all likelihood, probably not as good, obviously. But, you know, you get the drift. If people order commodities and the commodities, you know, rot or die or aren't produced, you can probably get them somewhere else. But the point about the contract for the sale of land, which we are dealing with, is the fact that by definition there is nowhere else on the planet that fits the description of that particular property. The fact that there's another property 100 yards up the road which, you know, looks virtually identical is actually irrelevant to that fact. And it's, you know, and again, it's even something as basic as checking the title, as in the title plan. Now, we're never going to, very rarely are we going to see a property. So it's not my responsibility to actually check the extent of the property, because I'm not going to visit the property, but I will try and put all the other due diligence in place to make sure that my client's aware, that if they've got a surveyor, they're aware. If there are any evident discrepancies, I'll try and raise them. I'll point it out to a lender. But, you know, people just sort of forget all this, really. And the old proprietorship register, Stu, I mean, how many times might we see a possessory title, which is not at the title absolute being the best form of title? Well, a possessory title means you and I have got to chug into action again.
That's it. So it's strange, isn't it? You know, and there could be an element of fault here with our profession insofar as, you know, do we sell ourselves? Do we explain what we're doing enough? Do we look at the title and the class of title, and do we tell people that, hang on a minute, you know, this is not the absolute title that we were hoping it would be? Does everybody understand that, you know, that title is the land registry giving us a guarantee that if there are any problems, the land registry could indemnify us? Whereas if we're dealing with a lesser type of title, the land registry won't indemnify us. You know, I personally had a case years and years and years ago where we purchased from an innocent party. The innocent party 7 years previous purchased from a fraudster, and that fraudster had changed their name by deedpoll to the name of the seller. Now, in this particular instance, because of the class of title that we had, the land registry indemnified everything. But if you're not looking at that type of title, then you might not have those guarantees. You know, do people really understand that issue? And I don't think they do. And it could be that we don't explain ourselves enough sometimes and point out that, you know, hang on a minute, this is not what we thought it would be. This has not got the class of title that, you know, that makes it perfect. You know, there are issues here.
Yeah, and of course, the number of restrictions we might see on a register now, and a restriction does exactly what it says on the tin. It restricts, it sort of specifies the parameters which have to be complied with before a title can be registered. So everything can be fine, but if there's a restriction which restricts the registration, we've got to, before we exchange, acting for a buyer, make sure that we can comply with that restriction. We've got to know what it means. We've got to be able to deal with it. It's not just another piece of admin. And I never cease to be amazed at the number of people who, when there's a leasehold property involved, Stu, and you well know we could have two restrictions on there, just, you know, one dealing with service charge and management company and one dealing with ground rent and freeholder. So we've got two lots of sort of hoops to go through, two lots of fees, etc. Probably no increased fees for us, I might add. But I never cease to be amazed how many conveyancers exchange and just assume that post completion they're going to be able to deal with the restriction, rather than realizing no, I've got to know to the best extent possible that I'm going to be able to comply with this before exchange, so it doesn't restrict my registration after completion. Because quite often, as you well know, you know, part of the teeth of a restriction where a management company is concerned is, well, we're not going to give you the restriction consent until the £3,000 worth of service charge arrears are paid. And if you only realise that after completion, you're completely stuck.
But I also think, though, that's an assumption. Most people make the assumption that the restriction relates to, for example, arrears of service charge. It might not be. It could be simply something that relates to, I don't know, it could be a client entering into a deed of covenant. Yet that management company could, you know, have an exorbitant fee for producing the deed of covenant. So all of a sudden it's another £500 that your client wasn't aware of, that you as a lawyer might have to foot the bill for if you were to miss that. So you hit the nail on the head. You know, restrictions, they restrict something happening. They restrict the registration concluding in your client's name unless you can sort that out. So, you know, time and due diligence have to be applied to them. And also, it's another third party that you're then dealing with.
It's one of your 19, Stu.
Yeah, and of course, what does that mean? It means more time incurred, you know, in terms of the overall process. So, you know, restrictions, things like that, mega careful, because they affect the ability to register somebody's ownership.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And I mean, the charges register, you know, typically covenants, obligations, do's and don'ts, and of course the seller's mortgage. Now everybody sees the seller's conveyancer paying off the seller's mortgage as a bit of sort of happy admin, but actually that catch-22 right at the middle of the conveyancing transaction, conveyancing wouldn't happen were it not for the undertaking given by the seller's conveyancer to discharge that mortgage out of the sale proceeds. And I'm not sure how many people realise that if the seller's conveyancer gives that undertaking, that professionally binding promise, and they haven't got enough money coming in, that firm's going to still have to put its hand in its pocket and pay the difference. And if it wasn't for that undertaking, conveyancing wouldn't happen, because you would just have a complete catch-22, because the buyer's conveyancer isn't going to hand over the money with the seller's mortgage still on the property, but the seller solicitor needs the money from the buyer before they can give before they can pay off the mortgage. So it's that undertaking that's completely central.
That's it. So exactly, yeah. So if you're a non-lawyer, an undertaking is like a legally binding promise that law firms can give. So requisitions on title, you know, we need an undertaking within those that mortgage and possibly others, second charges, need to be redeemed. And the term of that undertaking has to be explicit. So we know that the date, you know, who the lender is, that all has to be stipulated. We must at all times check that that's perfect, because, you know, if, for example, you were to miss a second charge and the seller's lawyers missed that second charge, there is a massive problem.
Yeah, and again, I mean, and covenants, people think, you know, they don't really think too much about covenants, about obligations. But if your client, and it's a relatively new property, for example, and if they want to run their aerobics business from the front room and do a bit of homework, in which we all want to do, and there's undoubtedly going to be a covenant on a newer property that says they can't do that. And of course, a newer obligation, a newer covenant is still going to be very evidently enforceable, and you're not going to get indemnity insurance for that. And again, it's up to us to find out that. And of course, that means it's the old thing that we come back to probably every week, Stu. It's the know your client thing, because we've got to know what our clients want to do with the property, whether it's develop it, alter it, whatever. There might be, you know, I mean, I know this isn't a title issue particularly, but the only, you know, they might not be able to develop because of perhaps a condition in a planning permission, removing the general permitted development rights, for example. All of this detail, I think, just passes people by. And I think you're right. I mean, I don't think we promote ourselves properly, but we all do detailed reports, which, to be quite honest, I'm sure a very significant proportion of clients don't read.
Most definitely, but I think the key though is getting getting across the point that this process is not a tick box process. This is investigating. So like you say, we need to profile our client. Now, our client may, as you said, need to run a business from the property that they're buying. You might find that the client, you know, their sort of love in life is a boat that they like to go sailing at the weekend that parks on the drive. There could be a restrictive covenant saying that you can't do that. Again, a hobby might be tinkering with cars and, you know, looking at stuff like that. That might be restricted within the title to a property that somebody's buying. So
I mean, I had two actually in fairly close succession. I dealt with a delightful older couple, and they were buying a property on a new sort of ish development in East Anglia. And, they had their beloved caravan, and the hoops that we went to try to sort out what they could do with this darn caravan. And they eventually, the developer wouldn't agree to them putting it behind willow fencing and oh God knows what else. And they could have got it in the back garden over this little bit of land at the back, but actually the little bit of land at the back was sort of subject to the landscaping obligations in the planning. And they still decided to go ahead and park the thing on their daughter's drive. And same developer, different development. I had two guys that had got this absolutely sort of top of the range, super duper mega motorhome that they would sort of spend 2 months every summer sort of hoovering around Europe in. I mean, it was nicer than my house, to be honest. And as you can probably tell. And again, we just spent ages sort of fanning and faffing around what could they do with this motorhome. And eventually they found somewhere else to put it because there was a covenant that said they couldn't. But I can guarantee, and they went ahead anyway, but I can guarantee, Stu, if we'd gone ahead and I hadn't noticed the covenant, and then they'd been told they couldn't put the caravan or the motorhome on the drive, I would have got a kicking. And both of those clients would probably have said, oh, we'd never have bought it, Lorraine, if we'd known. No, we'd never have bought it. Well, the answer is they probably would, but they need to know about it.
Of course, but that is part of what we do, though, isn't it? And that would be quite right as well. You know, I think if we don't advise a client about something as pivotal as that, i.e. what's in the title to the property they're buying, then quite right we should be brought to task.
Yeah, I agree.
It's trying to get this point across, isn't it? That, you know, if you've got a scenario like that, you may be looking to apply for covenant consent, i.e. to rectify this covenant. You may be looking at some kind of deed of variation to even remove a covenant. But of course, what does this involve? This involves approaching other parties. It could be, you know, you used the example of a modern builder, but you could be going back years. It could be a historic builder. It could be a one-man band kind of builder that you've got to track down somewhere. But it's another third party that, again, we're trying to make contact with. You know, we do all this at no additional cost. It's all inclusive within our fee most of the time.
Yeah.
So this is part of the process, you know, and going back, I'm harping on about it now, but we're not just ticking boxes here. We're profiling clients. We're looking at what the clients want the property for. You know, are they buying the property because, you know, they can put a 2-story extension on the back, make it, you know, a lot bigger? That may not be permitted. So, you know, this is an investigative, easy for me to say, process.
I'm not sure it is really, mate.
No, it wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. Not this time, anyway. So it's, you know, we're investigating that title, and like I said before, and at the start, this sort of point seems to be lost on everybody, sort of external of our industry, isn't it?
What people don't often realise, and again, conveyancers should and they don't, and I mean people no disrespect, because I do understand right now, particularly in the pressure that people under, but we are actually supposed to investigate the title to make sure our seller client is entitled to sell. And actually, I do a probate conveyancing course just a day. And I was really amazed. I never cease to be amazed what people, you know, the sort of mess ups that they admit to in a public forum in a course. And this lass said, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I suppose, oh well, yes, we on this probate course, she said, oh yes, well we didn't realise until the land registry raised it. They were acting for the seller. We didn't realise till the land registry raised it that actually different, I won't bore you with the type of grant, but a different type of grant of probate was required to perfect the title, and the land registry refused to register until that grant was obtained. And the buyer's conveyancer sort of wrote to us and told us. Now, what that actually meant, Stu, is that neither the seller's conveyancer nor the buyer's conveyancer had actually noticed and done enough work to notice, because it was quite complex, that the seller actually did not have title. They did not have authority to sell the property. And what the seller's conveyancer, bless her, seemed to have completely passed her by is that if the buyer had got cold feet or in any way had decided that this wasn't the property they wanted, the buyer could have had it was a void transaction. It wasn't a legitimate transaction because the seller didn't have the ability to sell the property. Now, they fannied around after the event and basically put the thing right, but that could have gone so horribly wrong for buyer or seller. You know, particularly if it's a probate sale, the seller could have withdrawn and said, well, we'll sell it to somebody else for 50 grand more, and legitimately done that.
Yeah, just listen to what we're saying though. So we're not even talking about money laundering and ID. We're not even talking about our obligations to banks and being on panels. This is simply what we do for our clients, and the risk that we undertake on every single file that we look at. And I always go back, you know, no disrespect to any other profession, but if I was a carpenter and I was hanging a door, I cut too much off the door, I could go and buy another door. That might be a stupid example, but if I mess up on a property and I've not spotted that seller had the correct capacity to sell,
yeah,
and we're buying at 300 grand, okay, I can't go and just buy another house for them. You know, the risk and the burden of risk that is on everybody's shoulders is incredible. Throw that into the current climate, you know, and the volumes that everybody's doing and the grief that everybody's getting. People have no idea the pressure that the modern day conveyancer is under. It's incredible.
I think those two, maybe, I mean, you know, maybe we should sort of almost finish where we started, really, because of course, you know, you've just made the very, very salient observation that, you know, for the last 20 minutes, we haven't talked about AML. We haven't really talked, you know, we haven't talked about due diligence. We haven't talked about obligations to everybody else. And that's because we've been talking about what is and has always been the central responsibility and job of the property lawyer. And that is the job of looking at and investigating the title. All this other stuff, whether it's fencer certificates, whether it's fittings and contents, whether it's AML, all of that other stuff is stuff that's just been added on over the years, and responsibilities we've just laid back and said, oh, no, if you'd care to drive over us, and if you'd like to turn around and come back, that would be great. That's
but the irony though of this, isn't it? The irony is that I think outside of our profession, people perceive that is the majority of what we do, i.e. looking at fence certificates because windows have been replaced, looking at things for boilers and electrical rewiring and cavity wall installation.
I'm not an electrician.
No.
I'm not a window person.
No.
I don't know, actually. You know, whether the certificate that's been produced is the right certificate. Those electrical certificates that run to 5 pages with all the little numbers and digits over them. How the hell am I going to know? I can say there's a certificate, and I can also say, you know, get the place checked by a qualified electrician.
Yeah. But we've not, and you know, we could go on and on and on. We've not spoken about searches and possibility of contaminated lands and radon gas, and we could go on and on and on here. It's limitless, isn't it, in terms of
it absolutely
what we
is.
do. We've just focused on the title, the core of conveyancing and what we do. And I hope today that this video has got across the level of due diligence that we carry out on a daily basis, every day, in numbers. And when we're under significant pressure, it's not just a case of saying, oh yeah, you know, next Wednesday I'll tick a couple of boxes, go and make myself another cup of coffee.
Submit
you know,
your pots, Stu, submit your certificate of title, as a love.
Exactly. Conveyancers are working extremely hard. You know, I honestly don't know any conveyancers, whether it be in this practice, any other practice at the minute, that don't, you know, put a damn good shift in. And that as a, you know, and that as a comparable on the fee that we get. It's such a shame, isn't it, that we get the moaning when, you know, if everybody actually spent a day with us and saw what we did and the risk that we undertake every day, it's insane.
Well, what we're really doing in many cases, Stu, is investigating and, you know, in some ways underwriting the biggest financial transaction that most people in this country will actually enter into.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing, quite frankly. And no conveyancing transaction, no two transactions are the same. You get very similar themes and similar issues on obviously, you know, a big estate in a locality, and in a way kind of happy days, but no two transactions are the same. Well, and maybe then that's as good a place as any.
I think there's another quick point to make as well, and there's this. I hate this innuendo that the cheaper the property, the more simple the process.
Yes.
Because I've said it and I'll say it again. You know, you might find that, you know, an 80 grand flat is far more complex than an £800,000 house in the middle of nowhere. You know, you could be looking at a house worth millions, could be far less complex than a flat worth 50 grand.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's the same with, you know, because I used to do a lot of rural practice, Stu. It's the same with, you know, piddling little bits of land in the middle of nowhere. People would think because they were paying sort of 15 grand for a paddock, that was all sort of, you know, your legal fees would be commensurate, but it's the same amount of work. And actually, you know, not dissimilar issues at all. And that, you know, it wouldn't be any less complicated, particularly then if you'd got a really ninky old unregistered title and it was going to be a sale apart, and the landowner was an old farmer who'd, you know, taken out more mortgages with the Agricultural Mortgage Corporation over the last 50 years and he'd cared to poke a stick at. And the AMC used to, and they might now, but they didn't used to release the deeds. So you'd wait weeks and weeks for them to send a very poor photocopy, enormous pile of the deeds duly photocopied. And you'd have to plod through that lot. And you think, God, this is a 15 grand paddock. I could be, you know, and there must be something else I could be doing.
Yeah, people would have no idea, would they, of the strange things that we look at. You know, I was acting for a client that was buying a garage not so long ago, and the garage was tucked around the back of the property. The right of access to the garage was by foot only.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no vehicle access. But these are the silly little things, aren't they, that we have to look at every day. We're not even mentioned the lease. And looking at leasehold properties and the common areas and, you know, things like that. And you know, you go into asbestos reports, fire risk assessments, cladding certificates now. You know, it's absolutely endless.
Yeah.
But you can go back to the simple garage, okay, that you can't get to. You can't drive your car there.
Exactly.
And there's another sort of thought, isn't there, I think, that just because somebody else has bought one doesn't necessarily mean that it's all okay. It's been spotted by that other lawyer, or it doesn't always mean that something in the same, you know, perimeter has the same title. It might not. So
it's that age-old cliche, isn't it? It's like on a development. Oh well, can I raise these queries? Or
what might be okay down the road, might not be okay for you.
Yeah, 20 other solicitors looked at this. Well, Stu, that we could carry on. We could do this in
all day on this one. All day.
Well, I think that was a cracking thought. That was a good. I hope people have enjoyed that. I think that was a really, really good topic that I don't feel is anywhere near concluded. But,
we couldn't cover this in half an hour, could we?
No, definitely not. Well, we'll sign out now, lovely, and I'll no doubt see you really soon.
Have a good day. Take care.
And you.